Ghibli movies. It's really hard to pick a Ghibli movie like the best one, but if I had to choose, well, we'll get to that. Hey guys, it's Lauren here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we even hop into the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on all my medias. They are always linked down below. I'm trying to post more consistently on social media lately. Yeah, let's get into it. So Ghibli movies have been made for the last 4 decades, starting in the 80s with things such as Castle in the Sky and Kiki's Delivery Service. These are iconic, well-recognized, and critically acclaimed films that deal with themes of environmentalism, capitalism, existentialism, also just with a flash, like a little sprinkle of whimsy, and then also just a spoonful of soul, and also really great food. Honestly, like, Ghibli films have some of the best just food montages and food animations I've ever seen in general. As of right now, there are 22 Ghibli films. We thought that would be the end of it, but no, I think Miyazaki actually has another one in him. So as of right now, 2024, there are 22 Ghibli movies, and then there are like 13 so far that I've seen. Not all of which are directed by Hayao Miyazaki, but most of which have been directed by Hayao Miyazaki. It was actually new to me, and this might be new information for you as well, that not all Ghibli films have been directed by Miyazaki. There's also great directors such as Yoshifumi or Takahata, or even the other Miyazaki. Hayao Miyazaki's own son, Goro, actually directed some of the movies, and apparently there's a lot of tension between the two, but I was just super surprised to even know that his son helped him make some of those movies, and it kind of just felt like the same kind of like weird fact that I ended up finding out, similar to how I found out that Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter creator and the Sailor Moon creator are married. Like, what is going on? What is going on, bro?
I know that ain't who I think it is.
But anyways, yes, there are 13 movies I've seen so far, and counting my goal before I am out of this world is to see all 22 films. It's rare that you can call every work within a series or within a franchise really a masterpiece. The greatest examples I could think of off the top of my mind that are not masterpieces but have some pretty good films are, for example, Star Wars. I think people really love the original series, but the sequels afterwards and like the prequel, maybe they're not the biggest fan. And then there's also, for example, Harry Potter, the MCU, which a lot of people love very specific movies within it, but there's also some maybe like not so fun movies in there. Great franchises, but not necessarily the most great movies within those franchises. I'd say Ghibli, while not every single movie is a 10 out of 10, a lot of them lean towards the highest of quality. They're pretty consistent in terms of the quality of the movies that are made, in terms of producing really great stories. I could talk on and all about these movies all day, but I really want to get into the grit of, okay, what is really the best Ghibli film? And I think this is hard to decide just because, again, there are subjective and objective opinions. I think when it comes to a franchise that has that many films, it's really hard to really pinpoint what the best one is objectively. I think the films that I've picked out, the ones that I'm going to talk about the most, have been a accumulation of things I've seen recently, so they might have a bit of recency bias, but also things that overall have just stuck in my mind for a while. And that is The Wind Rises, Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, and then also Whisper of the Heart. Those are, like, I would say my top 5 for a mixture of subjective and objective reasons, but we'll get into that, and then we'll also get into what I think is the best Ghibli movie, or at least my top 2. I think we'll start off with The Wind Rises. This is a Ghibli movie that's unlike any other one that I've really seen, and I think it's just not talked about as much. It was an autobiographical tale about this engineer in Japan during the rise of fascism throughout the world, and essentially he has this obsession with aviation. He really wants to master the skies through making airplanes, and there's this line that I think that's why the reason this movie is really stuck in my head. There's this line that says, "The wind rises, we must try to live." It's a line that actually encompasses the story really, really well. So again, this is a Japanese engineer, and his whole journey, or at least the journey that is traveled throughout the movie, is the fact that he is trying to, again, conquer aviation amidst a world that is slowly turning to fascism. So he is exploring this great technology from places like Germany, for example, and there are obviously just like sinister forces at play within the background that hinder him from being able to explore as much as he does. He also has dreams that he's visited by one of the greatest engineers, and also maybe the people with the highest kill count at that time in the world. And it was one of the films that surprised me the most because, for one, I watched it because if you look at the poster, you would not assume that the main purpose of this film has anything to do with like mainly engineering and fascism. I had no idea. I really thought it was like a cute little love story. So that's just It's honestly kind of fantastic because I got to watch a story that I didn't anticipate really resonating with me so much. The story of this tortured artist slash tortured engineer that really just wants to do a simple thing, but it's so entangled by all of the complications of the world in that present moment. So you see a lot of the inklings of fascism, whether that's through the working conditions that they're working in, further that's through the things that they see when they go abroad in order to find inspiration for the things that they're trying to create. Just like the fact that everyone kind of is going through it. A lot of people are just like indulging in things such as smoking, and people are just quickly trying to get wed just so they feel some sort of financial security or some kind of emotional security amidst such tumultuous times. It's also a period in history, I believe, when the West is starting to influence Japan more. So it's like things such as like paper technology, wooden technology, that's being overcome by, okay, like we need more steel, including steel. So industrialization is becoming more of a thing in Japan, and it seems as if they are falling a bit behind at the time in the world in terms of engineering innovation. So there's also that. All of that plays a really big role in this movie. In its sense, it's also a bit of a character, and it really surprised me just by how well it was executed. It's part of the story while not overwhelming the inevitably individual story of the main character. The things that surprised me the most was, again, like the fascism and the fascism. Also the proximity to the real world. Most Ghibli films I've watched are related to certain legends, or they just have some sort of really great fantastical element within the story. In this, there isn't necessarily a fantastical element, but I think the studio takes a lot of liberties in terms of how they're expressing historical events. So for example, like having the wind or like nature play a role in like bringing characters together. That's obviously like, okay, like maybe that could happen in real life, but the way it's expressed makes it feel as if it's basically the machinations of fate and destiny. Actually, that's another big part of this film that really surprised me, the fatalism. There is a big pull of destiny within this movie. You can tell just by the way it's orchestrated, probably just in part because it is an autobiography. There is no imagined ending where everything turns out okay, or like everything's just roses and daisies. This is the real world to some extent. Ghibliified, but it is the real world. So like we already know the fate of this main character, and that ends up making everything within the movie feel just the taddest bit darker and just a taddest bit like as if not everything's going to be okay in it. It's just a bit darker than most Ghibli films. It explores a period of history. I'd highly recommend it to like, I don't even know, world history buffs or people that are specifically interested in Japan. Overall, it's a really moving story. I think, again, the wind rises, we must live. Like, shit happens, but we got to continue to live our lives. I think that's an excellent message, and I think it's portrayed really well in this story. Really excellent film, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. The next movie I want to talk about is Kiki's Delivery Service. I saw it earlier this summer. This is a coming-of-age movie. It's one of Ghibli's best coming-of-age movies, in my opinion. I just think there's so many elements that are done really, really well. For Kiki's, it's a contemporary fantasy, which is a little bit more typical for Ghibli. I do admittedly enjoy the more full fantasy or full like imaginary elements of Ghibli movies, but this one is more of a contemporary fantasy where the only fantastical thing is the fact that Kiki is a witch, and she basically has like the power to fly. She doesn't really do much else. For the most part, she's an ordinary girl who's basically just trying to make a living and be by herself in this coming of age ceremony for witches where you must leave home. She's really eager to go out into the world and basically prove her mettle and prove that she's capable of living by herself and just living in this adult life. But there's a lot about the world she doesn't know. For example, like, okay, like how's she gonna live? How's she gonna eat? Like, actually separating work and life, I think, is one of the key elements of the story. And also learning how to just be a kid. Just because you're rushing and really eager to be part of the workforce, be a really like individual member of society, does not mean that you can't ask for help. It doesn't mean that you can't act your age. It doesn't mean that you can't have fun, which is something I really enjoyed about Kiki's, actually. It's a really humorous movie. It's a really feel-good movie. When I watched it in theaters, and I think this in part elevated my experience, there were just so many people laughing and enjoying all of the silly moments. Kiki's is just a really funny and humorous movie. It made me feel all of the emotions. I felt a sort of sympathy for Kiki, in part probably just because I'm going through my own existential work-life crisis being post-grad from university. It was a really fantastic movie to watch, and again, like I say, one of the better executed Ghibli films in terms of coming of age. So yeah, I think the things that make this movie hit hard and be one of Ghibli's best ones is its humor and also Kiki's personal journey. I think those are both the stars of this movie. The main point is the fact that we see Kiki's personal journey of knowing work-life balance, learning how to act her own age while still, again, exercising that individualism, and also the power of community and being able to help each other. I think those are all really powerful messages, and they're of displayed really well within this movie. Kiki's is definitely up there in my top 5, which is why it's in this video. But it's one of my, again, subjective favorites. Move on to my next subjective favorite. This is Whisper of the Heart. I watched it at the very, very end of last year, and it's definitely up there in one of my favorite movies of all time. This, I believe, and this could just be my subjective opinion, but I'm curious about thoughts down below. I think this could actually be Ghibli's best coming of age movie. And it's not directed by Hayao Miyazaki, actually. It's directed by Yoshifumi. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a Ghibli movie that's not directed by Hayao Miyazaki. What's going on here? So I ended up tapping in, and this movie is really different. You could tell how different it is from the very beginning because it doesn't take place in the middle of nowhere. This is a very city-based story. It's about this girl who lives in, I don't think it's Tokyo, but it's one of the bigger cities within Japan. And she essentially is just this normal schoolgirl, like a typical slice of life that you would just watch as one of the seasonal animes. It doesn't really tackle, again, environmentalism as much of the other series, but it is a really well done character-driven story. I think I have a slight bias towards character-driven stories just because I think they are a bit harder to execute, because it's really good to ride on the coats of an amazing plot and amazing world building. But I think at the core, like one of the things that really causes a story to resonate with people is the character being really well done. I think the main character within this movie is really well done. So the main character is this young high school girl. She is this writer. When we meet her, she is in the middle of writing this song and singing it for the sake of the choir at school being able to perform it. And actually, the funny thing is the song is Country Road. This is an American song. It's an opening montage of the cityscape and everything like that. And me, I was born and raised in the city, so the cityscape just feels super nostalgic and just heartwarming to me. Also went to university in a big city, so it's like everything about it just felt like it was a story meant for me because I'm also a writer. And it helps aid, I think, resonate this really immediate connection with the main character. It's one of my favorite songs, I think, one of my favorite scores of all the Ghibli discography. Music is really important in terms of how a story is portrayed. So it's definitely up there, but it's this coming of age story about this young writer, and she ends up meeting this guy who they don't immediately get along with each other. I love Ghibli films just because immediately, if the girl's the main character, she's probably not going to get along with the male lead immediately. They have this slight discomfort with the opposite sex. That just feels really organic and right to me. I hate insta love too, so like seeing like those like almost enemies to lovers like dynamic, I love that a lot. They don't get immediately along at first, but then they end up talking more and they find a bit of commonality and comfort within each other. The lead boy ends up revealing to the main character that he is someone that is really interested in the violin and he wants to study abroad. He wants to go to Europe and master his craft, which is really ambitious. And the main character thought so too, and she ends up being really inspired by him. I also think in terms of relationships, that has to be one of the best relationships I think in Ghibli, just because it has to do with inspiration and partnership and friendship. This movie executes it really well. I love this movie just because, again, the character journey of the main character is really good. It's the struggle of, okay, your love for your art while also being tortured by your art. She really likes to write, and after seeing how far the lengths that her love interest is willing to go, she just wants to figure out, okay, but how can I execute that myself? I'm clearly not doing enough. My boo is wanting to go abroad and study violin, and I'm still here. Like, what am I doing? It's a really interesting thing because she has to learn to be devoted to her work while not simultaneously giving up things that are really essential. For example, having an education, a backup plan, making sure that you're still connected to your loved ones. I think it's another story kind of like Kiki's, where it's about burnout. It's about like not mastering your over eagerness into something that is like long lasting. It's amazing. It's a really great movie. I also think I watched it in a period of my life where I was grieving a bit and I felt a little bit lost. And again, like, hey, I was a singer at the time about to graduate. I just felt a little bit lost in that movie. Being a fellow creative, being a fellow writer, it just felt really good. And overall, it's a really good feel-good movie. Its watchability is up there with Kiki's. I give Whisper of the Heart a 9 out of 10. Now, moving on to the actual movies that I think are the best. Before I even get into that, let's talk about things that I think objectively make a movie really good. For one, it's an excellent plot. It could be innovative or it could just be doing a common plot really excellently. If you've watched my previous video, I made a video about the simple story in relation to Demon Slayer. You could check that out if you want. But basically, like, an excellent plot doesn't necessarily need to be the most complex plot. Another thing that really is good in a movie to me is excellent cinematography. Being able to experience all of the emotions. If you can make me feel more than one thing while watching a movie, it's probably going to end up being really high up there in great writing. One of the things we learned in creative writing is like, okay, if you start or introduce a certain part of the story, that part of the story needs to be resolved before the end of that story. You introduce an object or a concept, you need to loop back and be able to kind of conclude or close or just like reconnect it in a way that's satisfactory to the audience. Both films that I'm going to talk about do that really, really well. House, for one, I'm not even going to bother to go into this movie that much because I think people have analyzed and talked about this movie to death for the right reasons. Again, its soundtrack, amazing, iconic. People know what it is without even having watched the movie. That's when you know when a movie basically exceeds its main audience and reaches a great big population that it wasn't even intended to reach to begin with. That's when you know they cooked. Some of the things that are great about House, for example, plot, in terms of plot, the time travel twist, did not see that coming. Did not see that coming. It also has an entire different world. The world building is excellent. Okay? They didn't even have to explain every single part of the world for me to know that it was a deep fantasy. We just need to understand the human beings more so. But the world building, excellent. It made us be in awe while not making us disbelieve what we were witnessing. And I think that's really it's a really hard line to balance, and House does that perfectly. Great romance. Bro. Nothing else needs to be said there. Obviously, Sophie's whole character arc, amazing. And the fact that it's shown physically, but also internally through all the characters that she interacts with, through the way she changes Howl, the way she comes to accept herself and see the great things within herself instead of being like self-hating and self-deprecating. Amazing. And none of this is just straight out said to you. It's stuff that's just shown and not told, which is a facet of Ghibli movies that I really deeply enjoy. House is like the objective masterpiece, right? But I want to give the case for another masterpiece that I don't think necessarily gets as much credit, and that is Princess Mononoke. That movie took me by surprise. First point, score, amazing. Literally, when I was watching within the first 5 minutes, I started to tear up just because the score was so beautiful. I think the opening scenes were also really captivating. We basically see Ashitake. He is faced with basically a demon that has taken over this animal's carcass, right? And it's a scene of him basically running and fighting this thing. So it's immediately a very action-packed story. You can sense it's going to be more than action. It feels like a legendary story based off the score alone. It's like you could sense the journey of the story and its semi-fatalistic, tragic notions while watching it. I was gagged. I was genuinely gagged. I started tearing up, so it already started making me go through all the emotions before anything even actually happened, and I enjoyed it. It felt like watching a folk tale. It felt like a reimagining for folk tale, and I know it takes in a lot of elements from traditional Japanese tales that we as a Western audience don't necessarily know the most about, and probably there is a more in-depth video about research of that, but you can tell the intonations and the fact that there are so many nature spirits, different tribes, and just so much going on. For another, there's just so many interesting points about this movie. I'll walk through it like a list. It had similar fatalist tones that The Wind Rises has. After being harmed, Ashitake is told by the wise lady of his tribe that essentially he only had so much time left to live, and because of the nature of the fact that he was cursed, he can no longer be of his tribe. So he was essentially tribeless. He's alone. And that's how we first meet his character. And it's really interesting. That kind of fate and being reminded that the main character is supposed to die by the end of the story, so powerful. So freaking powerful, man. I've never seen a Ghibli movie start like that, where it's just like, yeah, this character is gonna die. On God. We are so serious, and you can sense the gravity that Ashitake feels in just living his day-to-day life, knowing that he has limited days and knowing that there is a certain way that he desires to live and that he desires everyone around him to live. The industrialization, we see hints of it in other movies within Ghibli, but I think this movie is one of the ones that go more in depth with it. It's one of the few R-rated Ghibli movies out there, just because of the amount of wounds that we see, some of them done by Ashitake, some of them done by the main head woman of the industrialized island, and the fact that she owns guns and she uses them a lot. Gore is a really prevalent part of this, while still somehow having the whimsy feeling of most Ghibli movies. I don't know how they balanced that bit, but the economy of it also made it even more hypnotizing, even more compelling to watch. So it's one of the things I greatly enjoyed about the movie. Again, like, there is this dichotomy of whimsical and gore, but there's also this dichotomy between tradition and non-traditional. I think that's one of the strengths of the story. For one, we do see, again, a more morally gray character who is the head of the island, and she is someone who doesn't really believe in the gods, or she believes in the gods, but she doesn't have the same respect for the gods that other characters within the story do, even the ones that want the gods dead. She also is the kind of person that, it's not just that she disregards nature, but she also just advocates for people like her. For example, the other women from the island, while they are working in kind of terrible industrialized, capitalized conditions, she does help them feel like equals. She helps them feel better than they had before. She basically rescues them from a life of prostitution. Again, pretty dark for a Ghibli movie, and brings them to this island where they're able to live mostly in freedom because they're able to make their own money in ways that don't involve them selling their bodies in the way that they used to. We can see how she's actually done some improvements in terms of gender. You can also kind of see how, like, I like the way that they incorporate the way that guns and like different weapons actually change the dynamic of like between sexes and between genders in general, just because again, if everyone can use a gun, then that basically means that there is a more equal footing in terms of, I don't even know, like the physical distance between a man and a woman. For example, Zan, like, bro, girl was on it. She didn't even have a weapon, but she was raised like a wolf, babe. Like, they're basically like two opposite sides of the sword. Yeah, and then there's also, of course, like just the dichotomy of Ashitake, who is also incredibly, I'm not sure if I would say he's incredibly traditional, but he does respect a lot of the old ways. He comes from this very secluded tribe where they still abide by a lot of the old ways in a way that the rest of Japan isn't necessarily doing anymore, which you can tell by the fact that the humans all are trying to gain something from the gods. So yeah, I don't even know. It's just really interesting seeing that. It's also one of the Ghibli movies where there are so many more gray characters. This is one of the things that I think makes Howl's a great story, and I think overall just drives a story better. I think when you include more gray characters, it causes your audience to think more, and I think that overall just elevates the story. There are lots of great Ghibli movies. Like, there are so many just very overall incredibly good people in relatively okay situations where you don't really see the extent of their human limits or like the effect greed or hatred can have on the soul. In Howl's or in Princess Mononoke, for the most part, you see how that can affect the human soul. And even if they are inherently good people or they have done good things, there are also bad things, some bad forces that affect them. That's literally the core, actually, of Ashitake's character, because while he is a good person that comes from a traditional background that respects the gods, the nature gods, and also respects humans' rights to live, the hatred that is born from the fact that industrialization is trying to get rid of nature and the fact that there is this destruction happening and this imbalance happening within the country causes that hatred to take root within Ashitake and curse him. So that's just all like a core part of the story. And I think it's one of the more explored parts of a story here as opposed to any other Ghibli movie. So I think they do that really incredibly well. I think also, while this movie does manage to be a bit dark, there are still moments of humor. For example, there are these little stone creatures that Ashitake runs into after he rescues members of Eboshi's party, and it's really funny because we're just looking at them. They're just the most absurd creatures you've probably ever seen. There's also just like the really bumbling members of the industrialization island. They are humanized in a way, again, kind of great character, because industrialization is viewed as this evil thing that's causing disorder within the land that Ashitake actually has to stop to a certain extent. But the people in that island are not inherently evil, and that's where part of the humor comes from, and I guess a lot of the empathy comes from, because you can relate probably to a good amount of the workers there, and you can understand why they are doing the things that they're doing. Even when they're on opposite sides, like for example, when Ashitake decides to save Zan from them as a village, as an island, they don't actually want to fight him. They kind of just let him walk out because they're like, bro, you helped us, like, we are kind of in your debt in some way. We know you're a good person. We don't want to hurt you. We're multifaceted beings, right? So I think that is exemplified really well through every single character, even down to like the side characters of the island, by humanizing them in some way, while also showing how their actions have negative impact. So yeah, it's just really grand themes of, again, industrialization versus nature, really minor themes of just like this boy who wants the best for everyone that he encounters. I think every character in the story helps him in some way or does something to help other people in some way, but they still as a result hurt other people. So it's that weird balance. And Ashitake is even trying to understand it and grasp that as well as he's going throughout his journey. Overall, it's a really powerful story. It manages to feel really legendary and awe-inspiring while watching it, having great characters that can make you feel a mix of things that, again, it forces the audience to think. And I think that is a really strong component of a story. There are just so many elements of this that are really well done. And even the ending somewhat, even though it's kind of an open ending, it feels a bit satisfying, because I think, again, it shows that just because it's done for now does not mean there won't be a huge encounter like this in the future. I think it's just a really well done human story, and it managed to be really powerful in a way that I think a lot of Ghibli films still manage to be, but to a larger extent, just because of how much it more directly tackles the topics that Ghibli in general tries to tackle, which again is environmentalism, is capitalism, is existentialism. All of that exists in its most strongest form, I think, in this story. I think that's why I would consider, for now, Princess Mononoke to be one of the best Ghibli films, if not the best Ghibli film that I've ever seen. House is definitely up there for different reasons that, again, a ton of other people have went into in other videos, but yeah, Princess Mononoke is definitely up there. I just wanted to give it its flowers as being one of the best, if not the best. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on all my medias. They're always linked down below, and I will talk to y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.